All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just realized I was muted. That's embarrassing. It's okay. It's happened to everyone 1,000 times. Welcome to our session. We're going to get started. I was actually just saying that I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now in the New England area. A lot of us are bracing for a snowstorm. So batten down the hatches, everyone. Hope everyone's going to stay safe tonight. The resources for today's session, I shared the link in the chat. I'll share them one more time. So if you guys get access to that there. It's also at that bit.ly link at the bottom left. So that bit.ly link will get you to everything that's in here. I'm going to share out a ton of stuff today related to Google Sheets, some resources, templates, some activities that you can jump in and try. So I highly suggest jumping in there. The other thing I was mentioning too is that this is going to be recorded. So I just fired up the recording again. We're going to put this on our YouTube channel and share it out with everybody that registered. So even if folks can't get access right now, or maybe you have to jump in and out of the session this afternoon, feel free to go back and check out that archive. I do see that there's about 25 folks here already. So if you guys could, just as people settle in, do a quick introduction in the chat, maybe let us know what school or school district you're joining us from, and maybe what your position and role is in the school. So grade and subject area, or it could be, if you're an administrator or some other leadership position, add that to the chat if you could. All right, so really quick background. This is our 14th session in partnership between EdTech Teacher and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. We did a session last spring and summer, got a lot of good feedback from it, so we decided to do another round of it. This is the session that's going to focus on Google Sheets particularly. So this is actually one of those apps where, some people love Google Sheets and they're like Google script junkies and they know a ton of stuff. Other people get kind of intimidated by Google Sheets, but there's a lot of value to using this. There's a lot of creative ways to use it. So I'd also like you guys to, don't be shy. Feel free to share. I know a lot of you guys have a lot of experience here. I'm even taking a look at some of the familiar faces in the crowd here. So welcome if you worked with us before. And I see a lot of you guys are instructional technology specialists, tech coaches. So if you have resources and templates that you'd like to share in the chat, please do so. Consider this as like a collaborative space for us to share out some ideas. All right, so we are going to dive right in. Real quick overview of the session itself. So Google Sheets, there's a lot of different ways that you can use this in the classroom. We're going to focus primarily on using the features to facilitate some feedback and progress monitoring. And a lot of this could be used actually for student data. So collecting student data, analyzing it over time. But I also want to show you guys towards the end, there's a lot of ways that students could use this to keep track of their own projects, to monitor their own progress. And frankly, I've had a lot of different roles in education over the years. So I started out as a high school social studies teacher. I transitioned to a digital learning director. I'm currently a instructional technology consultant. Every role that I've had, I found a lot of use for Google Sheets, whether it's tracking student data, monitoring progress, managing my own projects, outreach. There's a lot of versatile uses of it. So even if you don't use this a ton with your kids right away, I suggest using Google Sheets in a lot of ways for yourself professionally, because it is a really nice, useful tool for you as far as a professional. All right, so let's dive right in. Thanks for everybody who jumped in and introduced themselves. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, so here's our agenda for today. So what I'm going to do is start out with a feature exploration. So basically going through, first of all, some go-to places to get tutorials and courses on the ins and outs of Google Sheets, because I feel like a lot of times educators might get a little intimidated by some of the uses of it, like formulas and filters and pivot tables and what's the difference between a filter and a filter view. It gets kind of tricky. So I think having a better understanding of those features is really helpful, so that you can then teach your students, or you can use it better yourself. So that's going to be the first part of this workshop. I'm also going to pause and turn over to you guys. If we get to the end of that part, and if there's any other go-to tips that you use that you want to share, feel free to jump in through the chat or through the audio and mic. We can make this a little bit more of a collaborative experience. Speaking of collaboration, the second part of this agenda is going to be more on digital collaboration with Sheets. So whether you're using it with your colleagues or you want students to use it for projects in which you can actually jump in and give them some feedback, Google Sheets is a great way to do it. I know a lot of schools that do project-based learning, or other forms of inquiry-based learning, Google Sheets is a really useful tool for that. And it helps kind of do progress monitoring and check-ins over time and help kids keep track of group work. All right, so the last one is actually a collection of projects and lessons that you could actually use right away with your students. I actually pulled some from the Applied Digital Skills curriculum. If you haven't used that before, really suggest checking that out because it has a lot of high quality lessons that you can take a look at, you can learn yourself, and then easily assign to your students. All right, if you're just joining us from in the session here, I'm going to paste one more time the link to the slides. I'm assuming it's working because no one said that it's not. So if you click on there, it should open up fine, and you'll have access to everything from our session. All right, the second thing I'd like everybody to try is if you click on the link on this slide here, I'll actually paste this into the chat as well. This is kind of like a workbook that we can all use and work off of. So this is a demo sheet. So if you guys click on that, it'll open up. I'll show you what it looks like. It'll say make a copy. And then once you make a copy of it, it's going to look like this. So once you're here, this is essentially a set of sample student data, a few different views of it, different types of information that you might use. Now, again, this isn't real. These are all like, demo names and accounts. Don't worry about any like student data and privacy stuff. But this is just for us to, as we go through, especially that first part, if I'm demoing a feature within Google Sheets, I'm going to do a live demo on here, but feel free to try it yourself. So if you're on a computer right now, I know some people are accessing this on phones and driving home and things like that. So I don't suggest doing that if you're on your drive home right now. But if you're on a computer and you want to check this out, you can do this live as we're going. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. All right, so what are some of those core features that are really essential to Google Sheets? Now, some of them most people understand, like how to create a sheet and how to go through the toolbar. But some of the ones I want to make sure that we go through and give you some tips on are the idea of like cell formatting, data validation, and then conditional formatting. Because knowing how to do those things are going to help streamline the process of taking a closer look at the data you have in Google Sheets, or if you're giving kids feedback, it helps automate some of that if you have that set up correctly. Also, I forgot to mention this too. One of the biggest uses of this is if you're using Google Forms and you're collecting a lot of assessment data, pushing it into a Google Sheet, you can do all of these things. And a lot of these things are not really capable of necessarily in the Google Form platform when you're just looking at student information. On the right side here, I also mentioned things like commenting, using the chart and explore tools. Some of the filters, this is really important to know if, say you're working in like a PLC or a data team and you want to manipulate the data, but you don't want to necessarily mess up the entire sheet for everybody else. There's ways that you can view the filters without actually changing the document itself. So that's a quick tip I'm going to show you guys later on. And then if you really want to go deep into the functions, I have some resources there, kind of like some cheat sheets on functions that people use in Google Sheets quite a bit. And then lastly, some notification rules and hyperlinking. All right, so the first thing is, before I really get into the weeds here, there are two places that if you want to just send folks or check out yourself that have some really quick get up and running with Google Sheets. The first one is actually part of the Google training site. If you click on that link here, it'll bring you down to a couple cheat sheets and Sheets basics. These are really helpful, especially for folks that are brand new. Like say maybe they're just coming into education, or they're just coming into a Google district from Microsoft. This is really helpful, and it has some nice project plans and guides. This cheat sheet right here, if you click on that, it's like a one pager that goes through a lot of the core functionality of it. So again, it's pretty quick to go through and can really get people up and running quickly. The second resource that Google put out, and I believe this is relatively new, the link itself actually looks a lot different. So it's called Google Cloud Skills Boost. I'm not sure if anybody's seen this before, but it seems like Google's building out a series of app-specific free courses. They've always had some version of this. Some were better than others, but this is an example of one that you could go in, take a look at, and it really shows you the whole ins and outs of Google Sheets. So if you click there, it'll just bring you to the separate Cloud Skill Boost website. You log in with your Google sign-in, and then this kind of works you through a free self-paced course on Google Sheets and how to manipulate and manage data. It's all video based. So again, those are two kind of like takeout resources if you want to take a deeper dive or share with some of your colleagues. All right, so let's go into some of this ourselves though. So I did see a few more folks pop in. So if you just popped in, the two resources I'm going to share in the chat one more time. The first is the link to the slide deck. The second is the demo sheet. So within your demo sheet, we're going to start there. I'm assuming you guys all know how to create a sheet, so I'm not going to mess with that part. The Google file menu, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here either, but the one thing that does come up sometimes is downloading the file, especially if you need to get like a CSV version and take your information and put it into other platforms. That's really the main reason I've ever had to use that download as. That's helpful because sometimes when you're taking information out of a sheet and putting it into like some other database or our system, a lot of times downloading it as that CSV file is really helpful. So just something to consider when you're doing this. The other thing is I highlighted the version history. This is really helpful too when, and again, this inevitably happens, if you have like a data team or a PLC or a group or a department and you're working on some type of assessment data or looking at progress over time, inevitably at some point someone screws something up. Like it just happens. It's okay. So going into that version history is helpful because you can go in. It's the same as like in a lot of the other tools. You can jump back to the last version and then restore something if someone messed up the formula or deleted a cell or something like that. It's not that big a deal. All right, so that's the some of the basics on that front. Pretty straightforward stuff. The second one though, this is where you get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts on the formatting, inserting, deleting rows. The one tip that I like to always show people though is, it seems like a little thing, but it comes down to the formatting of the rows up on the top. And what I find happen a lot, especially if you have information from like a Google form, right? And it's going into a Google sheet. Like I'll like say some information, right? They have like a long paragraph, right? And they have all this stuff and it gets either pushed down or it gets chopped off. Right. So typically, instead of getting like chopped off by the next column, let me just show you what that would look like. So this is wrapped right now, but usually it kind of looks like this, right? And then if there's something in the next column, it goes like this, and then it just keeps chopping off everything in the columns. So if that happens, when you have all the information that's feeding from your form into your sheet, I always like to just highlight those columns that you have the information in, go up to the wrap text, change that, and then it will just push everything down. Again, it seems like a simple thing, but it still kind of astonishes me on how many people just don't know how to do that. And it really makes a mess of their sheets when it comes to the input in the forms. So that's the only real one that, comes up. If any other things as far as the formatting you guys want to jump into, let me know. But this is basically where you can access all of that information. Some teachers like to do kind of this like diagonal facing like formatting, like you can see here, category 1, 2, 3. If you want to change that, there's actually a button that has like the text orientation. If you wanted to kind of mess with that a little bit, sometimes you might like vertical just to save space. That's all the way over to the right if you want to check that one out. The text wrapping I already showed you. So again, this is kind of the example of when it kind of pushes over into multiple ones and you want to push it back into one column. All right, so merging cells can get a little bit tricky. I actually suggest before you start merging a lot of cells, you may want to like make a copy of the sheet. I've made this mistake before where I've merged certain ones and I couldn't change the rows in the columns. So that can get a little bit tricky, but that's kind of my advice there is if it's a lot of information, a lot of data, maybe some sensitive data, make a copy of that original one first and then try to format it because I know sometimes that can get a little bit messy. All right, so this next one is called link to range. So I put a link here to explain a little bit more in depth what that is. But essentially it's a way that if you have a sheet that has a ton of information, maybe there's a lot of pages or you want to link out to certain cells, you can do insert select range of cells to link, and then it will actually shoot a link to that range right within your spreadsheet. So this has been out for a while, but if you want to take a look at kind of the documentation, I put a link in here. Not sure how many use cases you'd have with student data, but I could see that, especially if you have like a year's worth or a whole semester's worth, that could be helpful as far as linking different parts of your spreadsheet. Regular links, pretty straightforward. Let me do that. All right, so this is the big one, data validation. Right now, if you want to set up some data validation in your sheet, essentially what that does is it gives you a few different options. So let me just show you what it looks like in the sheet here. All right, so I'm going to go back to my document here. All right. All right, so data validation. So we have my cell range, the criteria, what I want it to be, show a drop-down list, a warning if it's not the right setup. So what does that actually look like? So if you wanted to set up a type of spreadsheet where you want people to input certain information, what'll happen is if it's not the type of information that you're looking for, whether it's from a certain range of numbers, whether it's a type of text, you can even have the specific words that you're looking for. If it's the wrong sign, it'll actually have a warning sign pop up. And then you can say exactly what you want it to look like. So again, this might be a little bit more if you're setting up a sheet for maybe other teachers or colleagues to input information from students or data. This is just a way to try to make sure that it's kind of clean going in, so that it's the right type of information that you're looking for. If that's not the type of thing that you're doing, it's not that huge a deal. The one that's a little bit more practical for most teachers is the conditional formatting. Similar idea, but what happens is based on what's inputted into those cells, you can do things like color coding it, right? And a lot of this can be really helpful when it comes to looking at student performance and information. So what that looks like is, let me go back to the cell here. You can see that some of that was already set up, right? So for instance, these cells turned green for every student that chose yes, or for every student you put yes into. Everyone that was no turned red. So how did it do that? Right. So the way it did that is through the conditional formatting. And if you go to this screenshot here, you can see that when you go up to format, when you go down to conditional formatting, there's a few different rules you can set up. And this is the one that's based on color. So let me go back up here. I'm going to set this up for, say, week 1. So now I'm going to go to format, conditional formatting. What I can do is if I want it to be a certain color, I can do a range. Right, so say I want to say it's less than or equal to, let's say 30. I want it to turn red. Okay, so if I want to add another rule to this whole column, actually, I should probably do the whole column. Then I could say if it's between, or say is between, say 30 and 60, I could make it turn, say yellow. Right, see how all the numbers in there that were in that range turn yellow. So essentially it's just a way that you can create, kind of like programming the color coding of the information that's in there. So you can do it by a lot of different options. These are all the ones that are there, but you can do it by text. What does it have in it? What does it contain? Start, or you can do numbers and dates. And that's typically what it's used for most. I would say when it comes to student information, the biggest one is just tracking like color coding, almost like a heat map of proficiency, right? So whatever your proficiency scale is, say it's just a 1 to 4, you could have the 4 different scales. A lot of the learning management systems already have that type of thing in there. But basically you can program Google Sheets to do the same thing for you as you go through your information. So if you want to try that out, if you have the sheet open, remember, just go to format, click on the cells that you want that condition to work with, go to conditional formatting, and then you can choose that. All right, so something that's similar to conditional formatting, but it's a little bit different, is it's actually a scale, right? So let me actually jump down to the scale version. Yep, here it is. So what I'm going to do is that same setup. Let me go to, where did it go? Oh, here it is. All right, so back in the sheet, it should have single color or scale. Let me go here. I don't know why it's not doing. Maybe it's because I'm doing the in between. I got a little hung up here. Format. What am I missing here? Maybe they don't have color scale anymore. Interesting. I'll come back to that. If any of you guys know how to do that, go to the top.
So
Stephanie, what am I missing here?
Go back to your
there it is.
There you go, right there.
There it is. It changed the spot on me. Thank you, Stephanie. There's the color scale. All right, that's a lot easier. All right, so you guys see that? I was looking down at the bottom here, but it's at the top now. So click color scale, and then since I had D highlighted, it color scaled all of those. If I want to color scale this one, I could actually change like the core color scheme of it, and then it would do that range. So there we go. Thank you, Stephanie, for the assist there. All right, so that's the color scale. If you want to watch a video of how to actually walk through the whole process, or if you want to share a video with it, my colleague Avra, I'm not sure if you guys have worked with Avra before. She is fantastic. She's been working with us for a while. She made this quick tutorial here, I think last spring, but it walks through kind of all the steps of how to set up conditional formatting, how to do the color scale, apparently a lot better than I do. But again, if you want to share that out with your colleagues, I'll put a link in here in the chat as well. All right. So next up is if you want to see some of the different automated charts and graphs that are created for you based on the student data or whatever you have in here, at the bottom, there's going to be an explore tool. All right. So if you click down at the bottom right, what it's going to do is give you a few different options based on what type of graph or information you'd want to see. You can edit this if there's any specific information you'd like to manipulate here, but this is another nice tool to see what type of information you can find on proficiency levels or whatever it is that you have in your Google Sheet. So remember, click that Explore tool. You might find some helpful information that pops up there. And it's just a little bit more information if you want to check out Explore tool. Okay, so the next one, which kind of throws people off a little bit, is the idea of pivot tables. So what it is, I put in a couple different resources here. The first one is a pivot tables explained. Just kind of walks through what a pivot table is, why you might use it in your sheet. And then there's also a template here. So let me actually add this to the chat too. All right, so that's the pivot table template. We'll open this up. So if you want to see what this looks like, click on make a copy. And once you open this up, you're going to see, this is just basic, numerical information. But at the bottom, you can see that it has, when it loads, a pivot table on that second tab. And then another one with a different calculation, right? So that's just an example of what they look like, how you could set them up. I also believe if you wanted to edit them on the right side, once you click on the pivot table itself, you can do some editing. Yep, over on the right side. That's a pivot table editor if you want to change some of the different rows, the values that are going into the table. So again, that first one's the data set that has all your information. What the pivot table does, it takes certain information from that set and does some things with it, mostly for visualizations, but maybe some other different things that it does as well. So that's the pivot table feature. Now, the next one I thought was pretty cool. This is where if you have, oh, my camera's out of whack here. Say you have a ton of student information and you have a lot of people working off of that information. A lot of times this kind of happens with like a student information system if you have like you're working with Aspen or something like that. But say you're working with Google Sheets. I may want to do some things with this information, but I don't want to necessarily change that sheet for everybody else that is viewing this or working with it. So what I want to do is actually change the filter views, right? So that just means instead of filtering the content, I'm creating a filter view so I can see it differently. And then other people could actually see those filter views, but it doesn't actually change the information. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to go to this particular filter. All right, so if I add in a filter, what it's going to do is it's going to filter this information. I'll just do it real simple. I'll just do like A to Z. So just be numerical. So that actually changed the document for everybody that's viewing it. Right. So say I don't want to actually do that. I want to just view it without actually changing the document. What I would do instead is I would go to data, filter, view. I click a new filter view. And then now whatever I set up, I can do the A to Z. Only I'm going to see that right on my screen. Right. So this is just the view that I'm currently looking at. If I click that X button, it kind of restores back to the original version. But if other people in my group that have access to the document, if they want to see that view that I created, they go to data, they go to filter views, and then they can click on the filter view that I created there if they wanted to see that as well. Does that make sense? So depending on what you want to pull out or what you want to change, that's just a nice way to manipulate it. I get some different views of it without everybody, kind of messing around with the information that's on the sheet. It also makes it you don't have to keep making copies of the sheet or copies of each tab. You just keep the same one and then you can change things up as needed. All right, so if you want a quick video walkthrough of that, this is a quick video walkthrough of sort and filter explained. Oh, Carol, you want to see that again? All right, perfect. So here's how I did that, right? So what I did is instead of going right from data to create a filter, I actually didn't create a filter at all. I created what's called a filter view, right? So when I click create filter view, what I can do is I can name it. So say I can say name alphabetical, right? So if I want to just create a view where I just filter their names A to Z, because maybe for whatever reason I just want to see them in that order, that name alphabetical filter view will be viewable for everybody, but it doesn't change the actual sheet, right? So when I X that view out, it goes back to how it was before. But if I ever want to go back to it, right, it saves it. So it just goes to that filter view. I just click here, or other people in the form can click on it, and then it will revert back to that way that I filtered the data. That makes sense? Does that help? All right, perfect. Again, so I think that that's probably, if it's just you and your own sheet with your own information, it's probably not that useful. But if you're collaborating with others on information, that could definitely be something to check out. All right, so the next few things are some resources and templates and project templates that you guys can use with your students. I don't need to go into too much detail on, but I just want to show you some of the go-to ones that are in here. So the first one is the 12 most popular Google Sheets functions. Most of these, again, you're probably not necessarily going to need an educational setting, but if you get comfortable with Sheets, you really know the ins and outs of them beyond just some of the basic like sum and filter functions. These are some of the more advanced ones if you want to check those out. Then if you're a fan of Ditch That Textbook, and I'm sure a bunch of you guys are, Matt Miller's been putting out blog posts and tutorials for, I feel like, over a decade now. I'm a fan of a lot of his work. He has a lot of great tutorials. He put one on here. It's a little bit older. It's a couple years old, but it's 10 Google Sheets tricks you probably don't know about. And actually, I found a few of these pretty useful. Some of these are from Eric Kurtz. He's another popular ed tech tutorial creator. But this actually has some built-in I guess filters, or I don't even know what it would be called, but he set up a script so that it's like a randomized writing prompt generator. So that's a pretty cool one if you want to check out. There's a few different ones as far as like, I guess like a quick workflow tip, right? So here's one that I didn't know of like up until a while ago, but it's just like little quick things that I didn't realize is that like, if you have a pattern going and you just click on it, right? So say for instance, I just wanted everything in this cell to be 1, right? I didn't realize this, but if you just click on the bottom right of it and drag down, it just fills it in for you, right? It's just like, it doesn't mean, it's not that huge a deal, but just like little time savers. But then also say I want to do the opposite, right? Say I wanted it to be like, numbers in order, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, like it'll detect that pattern. And then you just drag down. I got to drag the whole thing. 1 second. Should do it. There we go. See how it just kind of kept feeding in and numbering it. So there are little tips and tricks like that. Like once you pick them up, I don't know how you'd ever know that intuitively, but once you know it, it just saves a lot of time. So this might be one worth checking out. There's a couple other shortcuts. How to keep sheets and cells protected. Oh, that's another big one. Let me actually go over that one. There's a few different views and ways that you can lock and freeze cells that I think are helpful. This sheet's already set up that way, but I see a lot of times, for instance, if you have information on the top and the left side, let me just unfreeze them just so that you can see what it looks like unfrozen. All right, so I'm going to freeze no rows and no columns. And some of your sheets may end up looking like this too. So I have all of this information. And nothing's frozen, right? So as I scroll down, I don't actually know what these numbers mean, right? Because the actual title of it's gone. Same thing, like if I'm going across, I lost the names of the students. So a lot of you guys might know this one already, but like if you just take that row, you go up to view, freeze that row. Now I could scroll down forever and that row is still there. And say I have information that goes off for like 30 columns. Same thing with the columns. You just click on those columns, go to view, freeze those 2 columns, and now I can scroll over as much as I want and those names never disappear. Right. So again, nothing like mind blowing, but it does save a lot of time as far as scrolling back and forth, and keeps your data a lot easier to see as you're working through it. I'm trying to think if anyone else here that's any big ones. I think that might be it from this particular one. Oh, this was self-checking assessments in Google. That was a pretty popular one a couple of years ago. If you want to check that out, Eric Kurtz is another really good creator of EdTech tutorials, and he created some conditional formatting to help kind of do self-paced or self-checking quizzes. All right, so that's one. The next 2 I wanted to show you guys, this is a little bit different. This is more for, it uses some of those same principles as far as freezing columns and rows and doing conditional formatting, but it's for managing group projects, right? So here's one that I want to share with you guys that may be helpful. So let me put this in the chat too. All right, so you guys can check that template out. But when you click on it, if you wanted to make a copy of this, essentially it's a way that if you want to push this out to your students, have them put a task list. So especially if they're doing group work and they have specific things they need to work together on, what you do is you have them create a column that has conditional formatting, and you have like the 3 different options. It could be like complete, in progress, not started. You could even do it with a drop down. But even on drop downs, what you can do is put in that conditional formatting by color. So once it's complete, it automatically turns green. If they're in progress, it turns yellow. If they haven't started it all again, it turns red. Right. And just to show like the practical application of this, like I'm actually working with one of my friends in college, Sean McCusker out of Illinois, incredible civics educator. The 2 of us are actually in the last stages of a book project we're working on, but we've been working on this thing for 3 years, and you wouldn't believe how many Google Sheets we have with project management and all of these complete and incomplete and not started progress things. So I think showing kids that this isn't just something for class. I mean, people can use spreadsheets and workflows like this in their professional lives for all types of project management. So this is a very simple version of it, but I think it could be pretty useful for students. The next one's a little bit more involved. So if you wanted to take a look at this one, this is sample 2. And this one has a little bit more in-depth like tracking of what students are doing or what the description is, what the date is. It has a check boxes in there. This one I like a little bit more if you have specific checkpoints or if you're doing things week by week. Again, this would be something that you kind of show them. You could push it out through Google Classroom, like I don't know, like a make a copy for your student as like a template. But essentially you could go in and have them share. It should automatically be shared with you if you do it through Google Classroom, but this is where you can go in and provide them with feedback, right? So you can add it right to their cells, or you can add it at the bottom. I also think something like this helps save your own workflow, right? So instead of all of these different assignments going in and out of Google Classroom all the time, or all of these documents flying around, like you have these core documents for project management, and you're just jumping in, giving feedback on the document, as opposed to, you know, the endless flow of documents and assignments. And for those of you that teach in high schools, like I used to do, like I'm sure you have a huge number of students that you're working with. So if you could have a group consolidate some of their tasks and reflections into one sheet and work together on it, it saves them time and it saves you a heck of a lot of time, just as far as managing files. All right. So one pet peeve that I have with this, and this actually goes back to Google Classroom. I love Google Classroom, but one of the things that I feel an unintended negative consequence of it is that everything is so automated for kids that a lot of them have lost some of those basic skills of how to like create, share files and work with each other. So before doing something like this, you may have to kind of really work through, all right, one person is going to make this Google Sheet. You're going to share it with each other. You're going to share it with your teacher and just do it like the old fashioned way before Google Classroom started. Of course, you can do some of the workflow within Classroom, but I suggest just doing it like we used to do before Google Classroom existed, where you just have your folder, people share it in, because I think that's more real. When I think everything's automated and created for kids in Google Classroom, sometimes they lose some of that ability to make and manage these files on their own. Okay, off the soapbox there. All right, so then the next thing I wanted to share with you guys is a couple collections from Applied Digital Skills. If you guys haven't checked out this curriculum, it's been around for maybe 3 or 4 years. They keep adding to it. So every time I check back here, they have a whole new collection of lessons that you can use. They have all different collections. And the one that I found that's getting a lot of traction now is actually the workspace training and the college readiness sections, which doesn't have anything to do with ours necessarily. But speaking of Google Sheets, if you wanted to go into something like this and say, all right, I want students to do some kind of like mini PBL style lessons that come from this collection, and I want them to utilize Google Sheets. You can just filter this out here, and all of these lessons have Google Sheets in them to some degree. Like this is ones on making pixel art with Google Sheets, creating a budget, planning a community service project. So there's a ton of ways that you can use these. So if you're not really sure how to introduce your students to Google Sheets or how to get up and running, I think these are a lot of really effective uses of it, because they don't take long. Like a lot of these you can do in like one 45-minute class period. You can see like these are 45 to 90 minutes. Very few of them are like 10-hour projects. The other nice thing about these is you can just pull stuff out of it. Right. So say you don't want your kids to do this entire thing, right? So schedule project tasks in Google Sheets, right? If I wanted to, I can just go over to the teaching materials and I could download the videos from it and just post the videos that have the tutorials right to Google Classroom. Or if I could take the rubrics out, or the lesson plan, right? If it had any particular materials that I wanted to make a copy of. You don't necessarily have to send all of your students into Applied Digital Skills. You can just use this as a place to find nice resources and activities. So it's not just for Google Sheets, of course. There's a lot of other things in here, but if you're really looking for some nice kind of locked in and ready to use Google Sheets projects, that's a good place to go. There's 2 of them in particular that I liked. So there's one on creating a study schedule to meet your goals. I thought that one was really well done, and it's super practical. So like if you have kids working in your advisory or something like that, or if you just have kids that are working through progress management, that's a good one to work on. And then if you're looking for just more of a fun, lighthearted one, they have one where you can actually create pixel art with conditional formatting, which was pretty cool. This is an aside, but my daughter, she's a 3rd grader, and she actually loves this like pixel art app that she has on her tablet. So anyway, this might be more of an elementary style approach, but nonetheless could teach the kids how to do conditional formatting while also having a little bit of fun in their Google Sheet. All right. So actually, speaking of Sean, him and my he was a former colleague at ed tech teacher Sean McCusker, and Avra created this collection of Google Sheets use cases and templates. Some of these I've actually referenced a little bit to this point, but if you wanted to check these out, just a couple more resources that you could use with yourself or with your students. So let me just put more use cases. So you guys can click on that link and that will open up a folder. I believe you guys have edit access. If you don't, maybe drop me a note if you can't open these, and I'll make sure that they are all available to you. Because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, they may not be. Interesting. Okay, I'll double check on that. But those are some other ideas on how you could use it. So one's for like a science project, a plant growth tracker, one's for a science journal, one's a literature circle. So a lot of different ways that you can use this for project management in your classes. All right, so that's it for all of the stuff that I had to share. I do know that we have about 24 people on the call. Are there any other tips or tricks or use cases of Google Sheets that you guys have used? Because I know a lot of you guys are tech coaches and coordinators and administrators. Like, any other ideas that you guys would like to share with the group before we wrap up? All right, hearing none. I just like to thank you guys again for coming. I know there's a ton going on right now. There's a lot flying. There's snow coming. So thank you guys for joining today. I really appreciate it. In the slides, I just put the slides again if you needed them. I know Ashley just asked me for them. The last slide in here actually has a session feedback form. We would like to offer more of these again in the future. So if you had a few minutes to maybe fill this out, that would be super appreciated. I'll stay on the line if anybody has any final questions. Otherwise, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you guys very much. Happy New Year to everybody, and hope to work with you guys again soon. Thanks, everyone.